is former Minister of State for the Middle East from 2010 to 2013 and again in 2017 to 19. Alistair Burt, involved in negotiations, I know, Alistair, over Syria several years ago. Now a distinguished fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. Pleasure to have you with us, Alice, from this terrible moment. And with regard to the aid at the border, it was seen as something of a win for Biden. In theory, in practice, we're just not seeing the flows. Why?
These things are never quite as simple as they seem. The story of aid in many places in conflict areas is that when it is delivered across a border into areas held by combatants, often it can be misused or taken, and there are plenty of areas that show examples of that. Israel will be very anxious, as all the deliverers of aid are very anxious, to make sure that the supplies are used by the people in Gaza and they're not taken by somebody else. So they'll need to be met, they'll need to be verified by international agencies, and this all takes a little bit of time. So that's, I think, the reason for the hold-up. I don't think there's any dispute about the need for that aid to go in. It's a practicality issue.
Would Sunak have been involved in any of those discussions regarding the aid deliberations?
Yes, I know from having spoken to Andrew Mitchell within the last few days, I know how important it has been for the British government, for the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, to make sure that humanitarian aid gets in. The United Kingdom will have pressed for this, encouraged this, and I'm quite sure the Prime Minister in his conversations will have added to that.
In terms of James Cleverly and the role that he's playing, meantime, he's in Qatar, he's having conversations in Turkey as well. Is that where some of the biggest work is being done, away from the stages and more in the sort of side rooms, if you like?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And it's not so much that James is involved in side rooms. The Prime Minister can't cover everything, and the Foreign Secretary is going to places that have a different sort of influence. Egypt, of course, is absolutely pivotal in relation to Gaza and its proximity to Gaza and the need to enter and exit. Qatar and Turkey have particular relationships with Hamas and therefore are in a better position to seek help in relation to releasing hostages, which will be a primary aim of the United Kingdom government. There are 7 UK citizens referred to as missing. So talking to people who might have some sway and might be able to help in the release of those hostages is very important. I'm pleased to see such a combined effort being made by the British government. In recent years, people have said, has the Middle East slipped off the radar to some extent? This huge diplomatic effort by the United Kingdom makes it perfectly clear that isn't the case. We've always had strong relationships in the Middle East, good relationships with Israel and with its neighbours, and using all contacts in the region is really important at a time like this.
Returning to the point of Egypt, you brought that up in your second answer because it is interesting, the conversations being had between Israel and Egypt regarding this border crossing in order to get aid in, but also refugees across out. It seems from an outside observer view that there's a bit of obstinance going on, difficulties. Obviously, it's very sensitive. It seems that Egypt don't want to have any kind of extremists crossing the border in. At the same time, Israel doesn't want the aid to go to extremists when it makes its way into Gaza. I mean, it's enormously complicated. What have you made of Egypt's play in all of this?
There's a further complication, Roseanne. The population of Gaza don't want to leave because they fear that if they leave Gaza, they won't be allowed back. They have memories of what's happened to them in the past. Many are refugees already. Coupled with that, Egypt does not want to see a refugee city set up in the desert, which will be supplied by aid agencies and could be there for years if you look at other refugee tented cities in other places. So there is a real resistance to seeing that as an answer. Then you play it into exactly what you already said. That is certainly a concern by Egypt about who is coming over the border. They have had issues in dealing with terrorism themselves, and they want to be very sure who's coming over. And of course, Israel wants to keep a check on this as well. So these are all extra complications to the situation, because whatever has happened in the last couple of weeks, there is a wider context of the issue of Gaza and the Palestinian issue into which all this sits as well. I've rarely come across a situation which is so complex and where the omens are particularly dark at present.
That's troubling to hear, and also really poignant, an important point you make there about refugees not wanting to leave their homes. Just finally, while we have you, Rishi Sunak having landed now in Riyadh with talks with Mohammed bin Salman, we know that Saudi Arabia proffered themselves as a mediator last week in all of this. They have their own reasons for wanting to make sure that this is all contained. This isn't just about oil, it's about their own security as well, and then the Middle East prosperity at large and safety of the people. What do you think Sunak hopes to achieve from those talks?
We have to get over the idea that everything in the Middle East is all about oil. It's not. Saudi Arabia sees a very different future for itself. It knows that it's got to diversify its energy. It has what it calls its Vision 2030, an economic vision. But Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states certainly were envisaging a situation in which the Middle East was changing, and a modern Middle East with Israel firmly fixed in it was a key part of that. This has all been completely destroyed by what Hamas did on October the 7th and what is following. And everyone is very anxious to get back to that. That will need stability in the region, no return to conflict outside the borders of Israel. It will mean Hezbollah not taking part. It will mean Iran having to contain itself. All these things, Saudi Arabia will have a vested interest in trying to secure, using its power and authority around the region. It's very difficult, but it will use that. I think what the Prime Minister will be keen to do is to set the United Kingdom very clearly on the side of those who want to see the conflict constrained and not escalate, but also beginning to talk about what happens after. We saw with 9/11 and the things that followed. You have to think through what's going to happen afterwards, and that work needs to start straight away. And it will involve a further consideration of the Palestinian issue in a broad context. Hamas does not represent all Palestinians. All Palestinians are not Hamas. And aspirations for further developments for the Palestinian people, which have been going on for many years, will maybe take a different turn now. I think Rishi Sunak will probably be raising that. I saw something in the papers last week that he was thinking of doing that. It's not immediate, but it is certainly for the day after tomorrow.
Alistair Burt, former Minister of State for the Middle East, we thank you for your time.